Let's begin.
Hey there, scary story fanatics. Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. Glad you came back all this way for some fearful fun from the South. So, polish those horns and rest your hooves. It's time for the telling of a legendary tale that Doughboy420 likes to call This Way to the Goatman's.
It was the late 1930s. Segregation laws had officially been ruled unconstitutional, but many places, especially in the South, still practiced the separation of blacks and whites in every way they could. However, there were still a few good places. One such place was Alton, Texas. Alton was a small town in northern Texas. It was a little more ahead of the times than other places around the area, and African Americans even owned businesses in town. However, there were still a few folk that were set in their ways, a few folk that harbored outdated beliefs, and they didn't like black people eating at their restaurants, or black children going to school with their children, much less them owning their own businesses right next door to a white-owned business. One such businessman was Oscar Washburn, a 30-something-year-old African-American man who had moved to Alton a dozen or so years prior. Oscar lived outside of town, across the old Alton Bridge that ran over Hickory Creek. There, he raised and sold goats with his wife and son, and he made quite a bit of money doing it. Mr. Washburn had become so popular with the folks around town that they gave him the nickname Goatman, because they always saw him herding his goats across the bridge. They would stray too far from home, and the Goatman would always have to go looking for them and herd them back across the bridge. The man was good-hearted and would always stop to have a friendly chat with passers-by. He took his nickname and wore it proudly, even going as far as introducing himself as Goatman to new faces. It was when Oscar hung up a simple sign that fate changed for him. He painted up a piece of wood with bright red paint to make a sign that read, "This way to the Goatman's." And he hung that sign up on the Alton Bridge that was between his home and the town of Alton. It was that seemingly harmless act that sealed his fate. The local chapter of the Ku Klux Klan caught wind of this and saw it as the last straw. To them, a black man having a successful business was bad enough, but they seen the sign as him flaunting his success, like he was asking to be set straight. So, a group of a dozen or so of them decided to take matters into their own hands and right the man they seen as wrong. It was late in August when the Klansmen packed into 2 cars and flicked off their lights and crept across the bridge in the middle of the night. They slowly drove down the dirt road, stopping at the base of the small hill that Oscar Washburn's house sat upon. There, they got out of their cars and stormed the house. The Klansmen broke windows of stones, pounded on the doors, screaming obscenities and slurs. It wasn't long before one of them kicked down the front door of the Washburn home, knocking the door right off its hinges and sending it crashing to the wooden floor. They piled into the house in a drunken rage, where they found Oscar coming down the stairs with a knife in his hand. He knew he had to protect his family at all costs. The men charged him and took him down, but not before he could cut a couple of them, catching one of them on the hand, slicing through between his thumb and index finger. The other was cut across his left shoulder, slicing right through a jailhouse tattoo of a swastika. Oscar couldn't fight them all off and was quickly overtaken. They beat him, breaking his bones and leaving him nearly senseless, calling him everything that a sick mind could imagine all the while. The angry mob grabbed his legs and dragged him outside and down the steps, feet first, allowing his head to bang against the wood of his steps and then across the rock-covered path that led from his house down to their cars, where they tossed him into the trunk and drove back down toward the bridge. Oscar could see a rope laying next to him in the trunk, a rope tied into a slip knot of a noose. Oscar knew then what was going to become of him. He felt every bump of the dirt road between his home and the bridge, and he could hear the men inside the car degrading him the whole time. And then the car stopped, and he heard the car doors open and then slam shut. He then heard the familiar sound of one of his goats, but the goat sounded as if it were in danger. It was then that the trunk of the car opened above Oscar, and he seen his captors again. The group of white supremacists pulled him violently from the trunk of the car and grabbed the rope that laid beside him. One of the men took the rope and tied off one end tightly around the crossbeam, just overhead of the left side of the bridge, while another man wrapped the noose around Oscar Washburn's neck. He struggled against them, but the men beat him into submission once again. It was then that a man from behind Oscar walked around beside him and stopped in front of him. The man held a screaming and kicking goat in his arms. Oscar pleaded with the men to stop, but they had much more planned. The man that had fastened the rope to the crossbeam then retrieved a knife from his pocket and handed it to the man that held up the poor goat. The man looked right into Oscar's eyes as he cut the goat's throat. Oscar screamed as a tear flowed from his eyes as the man tossed the goat over the side of the bridge and into the waters below. The men then tossed Oscar over the bridge after his goat, and for an instant the rope went tight, and then it was over. The Klansmen cheered and laughed at the horrible deed that they had done. It was only when one of the men looked over the side of the bridge that the cheering stopped. The noose was empty. "It must have cut clean through his neck," a bald-headed man spoke, sickeningly proud of himself. "But wouldn't we have heard a splash?" the younger man questioned. "Yeah, you're right," another man spoke from behind the others. "Where's he at?" The first man spoke again. "He must be hiding under the bridge or something," the man with the swastika tattoo added. "We'll flush him out. We'll go after his family and let them join him." The bald man spoke again. "You hear that, boy? We're gonna get your can too," he finished. Then the men piled into their cars again and did just that. They returned to the Washburn home to find his wife and young son huddled together, hiding in one of the bedrooms. And just like Oscar, they dragged them out and tossed them into the trunks of their cars, keeping them both in separate trunks. Then they brought them back to the bridge where they had hung Oscar, and they gave them one last chance to show himself. "Come on out, we got your wife and boy," one of the men said. The men waited several moments and got no reply, so they did as they promised. They pushed them off the side of the bridge, where they fell, screaming to the jagged rocks of the creek below. A small few of the men were even a bit sickened at what they had just done, remaining silent while the others cheered. Having sent a clear message of hate to the rest of the African Americans in town. The men all returned to their cars and began their trips to return home. The first car turned on its lights, and there, standing in the middle of the road, was a 7-foot-tall behemoth of a man. Atop his shoulders sat a large head of a gray goat. Its beard hung down long and faded from gray to white, and the horns curled up around to create a perfect black spiral. His snout snorted and curled as the beast took in each breath, and the creature's eyes glowed with a bright, blood-red color. Then, the beast charged the car, knocking the entire first car right off the bridge and sent it crashing into the creek below, killing 2 of the 5 men inside upon impact. The other men had not even gotten into the second car yet and were terrified of the Goatman that sent their friends hurtling over the side of the bridge. The clansmen scattered into the forest. A man with a thick brown mullet was quickly caught by the large hands of the Goatman. The same hands then split the man in half, breaking him at the waist and allowing his innards to spill out onto the bridge and down into the water below. The next one was the younger man that hung the rope. The Goatman found him cowering in fear in the bushes down by the creek. The man tried to run, crawling away from the Goatman, but his leg was quickly snatched up, and the man was lifted backwards into the air, hanging by 1 foot. He screamed in terror, but he was then silenced by the Goatman, swinging him around and cracking his head forcefully against a large tree. The bald man and the man with the swastika tattoo stumbled out of the car that sat in the middle of the creek. They both had broken bones and could barely do anything. The bald man crawled up the bank opposite the Goatman, while the other man tried to catch the current and ride it downstream, away from danger. The Goatman ran quickly through the water, toward the man swimming away. The water didn't even slow the beast at all. It wasn't long before a large, hooved foot slammed down onto the back of the man, breaking his spine and causing him to scream in pain while his face was beneath the water. He quickly drowned because he was paralyzed and unable to save himself. The bald man had a broken leg and was crawling slowly up a muddy hill. The man was having little success. He would get a good distance up the hill, and the muddy earth beneath him would give way, sending him sliding down the hill again. He was nearly crying, realizing his fate, as the Goatman approached him from behind. He rolled over and looked up at the beast. "Please," he said. "Please, I'm sorry," the man begged. "Please, I didn't want to. They made me do it. I'm innocent. I'm sorry." The fat, bald man continued to beg and attempted to reason with the Goatman. The Goatman brought a large hoof down onto the chest of the man, breaking his ribs. Then the large, clawed hands of the beast grabbed hold of the man's arm and pulled it up and away from him, wrenching it free from its socket and splitting the skin, ripping the man's arm off. The man screamed in pain as the Goatman swung the arm down like a large club and bashed the man's face in with his own dismembered arm. The beast slaughtered every single person he could, leaving a bloody mess in his wake. Only 2 men got away that night. They told their story to the police, and no one believed them. The police ruled the deaths as a freak motor vehicle accident. No one believed that a beast that was half man and half goat attacked them. That's just crazy talk. One of the men wound up in the state lunatic asylum, not wanting to accept anything other than what he had seen. The other one drank until his liver shut down. He drowned his memories away and died only a few short years after the horrors he had witnessed that night. Several urban legends have passed over the years, such as if you park your car on the bridge and then turn off your lights, you can see the glowing red eyes of the Goatman looking back at you from the darkness. Another says you can hear the screams of the wife and child of the Goatman as their spirits fall to their deaths, experiencing their tragic demise all over again. It is said that the Goatman still haunts the area around Alton Bridge. Alton is long gone, replaced by the modern world. But the bridge still stands, stretching over Hickory Creek. And they say that if you go there in the middle of the night, you might catch a glimpse of the Goatman, or see an old wooden sign with letters written in blood, a sign that reads, "This way to the Goatman's."
Well, that just goes to show you, it's always the horny ones you have to watch out for. Wait a minute, forget I said that. But don't forget to stop back in again next weekend for more of that terror you crave. And until then, remember to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you can haunt me again next Saturday.